This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast revisiting television sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Star Cops, episodes 3 and 4.
Commander Spring, I have made a momentous discovery. Look, it is of profound significance to the whole of mankind.
It's one of your father's control panels.
But do you see it?
I'm sorry, what am I looking for?
The threat.
I don't understand.
The invisible worm that flies in the night.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast available on intelligent listening systems. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
I have a question back for you. What are you, a groundsider?
A groundsider? I am a groundsider, as a matter of fact.
We're all groundsiders.
That's the sad world we live in. It's almost 2027. We're still not in space.
I know.
Did you realize, I saw something somewhere that the lead character in this, like, given his age on the show, he was probably born in, like, 1987 or something.
Oh, that's weird to think. I never really thought about that. So he's not that far off us.
I can't remember. Something like that. So we're like, he's, like, slightly younger than us.
That's weird. We could be Star Cops, Luke.
I mean, but for the grace of God, we could be Star Cops. All right. Well, this week, before we get into it, we are joined by a guest on the podcast. Jeff, thanks for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the audience may not know this, or probably won't know this for the most part, but Jeff is a big reason Continuum Drag got off the ground. He was at Astrolab. He helped get us start going by getting us in there to start recording. So Jeff's a big part of the history of our podcast. So I can't believe it's taken us this long to have you on, considering what a founding member you are.
Well, I appreciate being on. It's always a nice excuse to talk to you.
And Jeff, I think you're our first guest that is smoking on the podcast. I like it. It makes us feel like it's the 1960s. We're all just sitting back, having a scotch and a cigarette. It's a very casual feel. Now, I'm not a smoker myself, but I enjoy seeing it.
Is this not when, like, that show was made, like, in this atmosphere? I thought I was setting a tone for...
I don't think there's any smoking in space.
Well, not in space. But, just off camera, that's exactly what was happening.
I'm going to point out that a man in the second episode
You're
smoked
right.
a cigar.
You're right.
He is the American, the villain, so we all know what role we're playing on
He's
this
just
podcast.
chomping a big stogie. Oh, yeah, you're the villain this time?
Upside down, coming in, We all set a tone. Who's the big one here? Who's throwing the big dick energy, in this show?
Well, Jeff, as you know, science fiction television podcast, we love to ask new guests, what's your history with kind of sci-fi and sci-fi TV?
Doesn't it all start with the Ninja Turtles? I mean, like, isn't it...
I think that was Socrates that said that, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, my history. I came to Socrates later in my life, but Ninja Turtles first. Which came first for me? Who knows? So, yeah, that's my history. I think I've.
Are you a fan? Are you a fan of the genre? Or are you?
I meant that sincerely. Not just as a joke. I mean, I have a matching hat T-shirt combo. I still rep the idea of things below us, things above us.
Who's your favorite of the Ninja Turtles?
I mean, it evolves, right? As you do, I think, as a person. I think at first you kind of just identify with the basic
Everyone's favorite is Michelangelo to begin with, right?
Always. Well, because he's the one with the least conflict and the one that's, the most fun, I think. But, I think in my later life, it's obviously Donatello, right? I mean,
in my later life, I've moved on to Raphael.
That was mid. He was mid for me. I mean, there was a point in my life where I was like, didn't belong, But now I'm just into gadgets and shit, and that's fun. So I would identify more there.
Jordan stopped at teenage angst. That's where he stopped living with Raphael.
Yeah, exactly. And then exactly, pretty much. I mean, and then it evolved straight through to, I think when I was 14, my aunt, who's like 30 years older than me, we never see her. She heard I liked movies and was really into movies, so she got me a VHS copy of Blade Runner, widescreen VHS, right? And this thing kind of like, what is this? Like, what is this? Like, there's like, what? I have no idea. And I would, because and this is the thing that I still to this day remind her, like it made me think like, who's doing this? Like, why is this being made? Do you know what I mean? I couldn't follow. There's no real story. There's no real emotion. There's no reason to watch it other than like you're completely fascinated by what's happening. So I think it kind of like evolved there. It went from simple, and that's why I sort of start with Turtles and basic instincts of like sci-fi, and like being touched by that. But I think that's what really opened my mind to like, why would you tell a story? Not just to enjoy one, right? And right. I think now it's really exacerbated, obviously, with comic book movies. But for mass public, mass appeal, whatever, that's just popular now. But yeah, I think that's where it started. And that's my history. That was the question, right? There you go.
This is I loved this answer. It was from the bottom of the sewers to the top of space. You went through all of it.
But the most important part, Luke, we never found out who your favorite Ninja Turtle is.
There you go. That's a very good question.
Oh, it's Donatello.
It's Donatello as well. I don't think I've ever been in a room where two people have picked Donatello. He's the Ringo, isn't he?
No, Michelangelo would be the Ringo.
It's got to be Leonardo. I mean, he might have been the leader, but like, who wants to be Leonardo?
I think Leonardo was my brother's favorite.
Okay.
I'll have to follow up. I'll follow up. We'll answer it in another podcast.
Who wants to live in constant shame of not meeting expectations? Listen to that. How is that attractive to a child? We should hug your brother.
No, he's a Leonardo. No hugging.
Right? Sorry, Sensei.
Raphael would never hug a Leonardo.
No.
Not that this is about Ninja Turtles, but there's more to go into here.
There's more to go into. So maybe this is a good time to transition. Let's start talking about these episodes. I'll get into the IMDb summary for episode 3, Intelligent Listening for Beginners. Spring fires 2 Star Cops, Pal Kenzie and Kirk Hubble, for corruption. A terrorist organization, the Black Hand Gang, has attacked a chemical plant and the Channel Tunnel using a computer worm. I don't know why I said it that way. The Star Cops are warned of further attacks by a communications expert engaged in secret research on an outpost on the moon. And that was courtesy of Gus F.
Ooh, Gus F. I have one thing to mention before we start. I don't know if you guys noticed a difference, because I don't think it's as drastic as some of the things I've read, but this show had a lot of problems during production about conflicts with the writer and the producer, and apparently there's 2 major directors that direct this series, and they did it in block shooting. So the first 3 episodes were directed by one director, then another director took over for 2, and then back and forth. Now, apparently these 2 directors did not like each other, did not like either one's style, and so weirdly, the episode 3 we're watching is directed by one director, and episode 4 is by another director. And from what I read, the one, Chris Baker, who did episode 3, liked a, quote, pristine, brightly lit approach, and the other director, Graham Harper, liked everything sort of illuminated by the screens and things, and he wanted like the sets to be messier and dingier and have things. I don't know if it's that clear in these, but it's something maybe as we go through, if we kind of notice the differences of this sort of disorienting kind of clash of styles between these 2 directors, which we'll see throughout the series.
That's interesting. I mean, I'd have to go back and watch them again to see if I know. Like, we were already watching like a old version
bad copy.
Has been updated to YouTube or uploaded to YouTube, so we're already kind of several levels of degradation in. But I'll be watching for that. I think you do see a little bit more screens, like lighting of by screen in the second episode, so that makes sense to me.
But we still get that theme song.
It's all that matters.
Boom, 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 boom. It's been in my head all week.
Jeff, did you enjoy that theme song to Star Cops?
It was very oddly intriguing. It was more the visuals to me. I'm more of a visual person. I don't even know what the song was. I mean, I'm just thinking this was a creator's like friend who kind of did music, right? That's what
it was the Moody Blues. It was a real band.
Yeah, because like, isn't that what like everyone's dad's friend can kind of do? You know, it's like that's kind of like what it sounds like. It's just like this really kind of trippy stuff, and which is great. And it is Moody Blues is very very apt. Because that's all it kind of gives you is this ominous tone, and the fact that like the face shield kind of turns into the frame, the helmet, and it goes like through it. It's kind of like emptiness. You know what I mean? It's
a good opening title sequence. There's no question.
I just got to think at the time, right? Like, what are opening title sequences like? They're not like that, right?
Yeah, no, it's just cross-cutting footage from the show, and then I don't know, Urkel jumps through a door.
Yes, right. This was its own thing, and like the footprint coming down, like this was the David Fincher opening sequence, like of its time for British television, right?
Absolutely.
Like, this was its own commissioned deal.
We could probably talk about the opening theme song forever with its title crosshairs, but we'll get into the episode because episode 3 opens on a cyber attack happening at a chemical processing plant.
Yeah, biggest production value I've ever seen in one of these shows. There's shit blown up everywhere. How many shots were there? How many wide shots of stuff going crazy? So it's days, right, for this budget, for this, or how many cameras? This is an all-out day for this show.
It is insane. Like, we kind of see some people who are, I guess, working at the control room of it, and a couple lines of poetry suddenly appear on their computer monitors. O Rose, thou art sick. And the invisible worm that flies in the night. And this is to indicate a cyber attack is about to begin. And immediately, like, the place starts going crazy.
One thing I really like about this, when you see this sort of thing in TV shows, whatever it might be, Star Trek or whatever, some of the extras are really giving it when they're running, and some aren't. And I like that. I like the extras who are like, don't worry, I'm going to get down the staircase. We'll be fine, guys. Calm down. No need to rush.
People are collecting insurance off that show.
Yeah.
Yeah, there has to be 25 people in just the same white jumpsuit just running around this like big open, I guess it's like a 2-story, it looks more like an office building maybe than a perhaps chemical plant. But they're like throwing debris at them. There are explosions. There's smoke everywhere. People are just jumping off of the second floor. It's insane.
The best thing to me though is because they're going to such lengths. And the editing team obviously knows this, or there's a producer in the room, where they're holding the shot from action right to cut. There's no, because every shot is its own thing, which I think is what makes it feel like the most Michael Bay sequence of the 2 episodes I watched, right? There is this sense of like Transformers happening in that moment. And I love the flip from, behind the monitor, right? These words on a monitor, and it's this like, it's like POV of the, you know what I mean? And they're just setting the tone. And then it just flips on a dime. It's like, oh, we got a text message is what it feels like, right? And this text message, is like, what is it? This, hidden...
The invisible worm that flies in the night?
Yes, no, but that's the other one. There's this other thing. The art of a rose is...
Oh, Rose, thou art sick.
Oh, Rose, thou art sick. That's it. And then all of a sudden, Captain, we've lost, the ability to control this thing. And it's 2 guys in a room. And it's very static. There's no moving shot. It's just, and it's overlit. And then they cut to a sequence of the reaction of now this virus and them not being able to control stuff. Stuff is blowing up, and it's 25 shots. Each shot is epic as the next of like the same 60 out background being rotated, falling over each other, running around, and then blowing gaskets and stuff and super sound effects, right? It's quite the turn.
I mean, this is the most action this show has ever had. They're like clearly like, oh, this is going to be amazing. Let's spend all day. Although I do like that this whole sequence ends on stock footage of an explosion. That's how, because they don't have enough money to actually blow up a building. So then like it fades into just a stock footage like explosion happening.
What was it? The cutaways in the show and like the contrast. That's what I mean. Like it goes from these, and then all of a sudden it cuts to like a model just like going through, and it's clearly a model.
The little vehicle, the little moon-based vehicle.
The little moon-based vehicle, and it's clearly a model going in slow-mo, and it's holding forever. And it's like the contrast.
It's an interesting thing you mentioned, because at both times it's actually a really good little model, and I think for the time it probably looked really good. It's a little tiny bit hokey now because you can see it doesn't quite move like something that would have that weight in real life, but it's a pretty good little miniature. But what I like about it is we almost see the journey from the one base to another in real time. It takes so long, and I remember at the end when we'll go through it, there's some scenes, and then they drive back. I'm like, we're not going to see them drive back, are we? Yes, you are. You're going to see them drive back. It seems like it takes like an eternity for them to drive from one base to the other. And I'm sure it's probably, there's an intention to that, to show the journey that has to happen. But it's so funny to see in TV, watching this tiny little miniature drive over these mini little rocks.
Yeah, I heard this is George Miller's favorite episode of this episode. It's what Fury Road is based on.
Yes, this is where the episode heads to, is we head up to the moon base, and Nathan and Thoreau, our 2 lead star cops, have been invited out to take a moon rover, which we, as you said, see drive all over this moon, to the very high security Outpost 9. They've been invited there by the son of an Elon Musk-esque super wealthy inventor. The son's name is Dr. Chandri, and he wants to speak with them.
I found him very secretive off the top. Is that how we all felt about him? He was a little bit cagey. He was very nice, though.
I gotta see a picture of this guy again.
He was, Dr. Chandri is basically, they go out to this secret moon. It's not a secret moon base, but it's high security, and whatever he's doing there is clearly, like, top secret. He's essentially invited the Star Cops there because he's received information about an imminent Earth-Moon shuttle hijacking by the anarchist extremists named the Black Hand Gang.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, and I remember that the black guy in the show was like, that's a shitty name.
He is, every single time he's come out, he seems overly irritated about whatever information they're getting. He's always a little bit off with it.
Definitely.
I do like that later in the episode, there's just an aside with Thoreau has Box, his little personal AI assistant. And there's just an aside where Box
is that what the box is in the pool table? So I'm coming in cold, right? So the dynamic for me, anyway.
Yes. It's basically a Siri or an Alexa.
Yes, which you're like, oh, wow.
But Box looks into the Black Hand Gang, and he gets back to him, and he's just like, oh, by the way, I looked into that name, and I think whoever this terrorist group is doesn't understand who they named their gang after. He's like, the Black Hand Gang was an American criminal organization, but the Black Hand was a Spanish anarchist group, so I don't think this group of terrorists is very bright. I was just like, this is a weird aside.
You know, the contrast in the two episodes, number 3, it was very plot-driven, and therefore you're just trying to stay on task with the show, especially with its pacing, and, like, its love for the models, which, like, again, you know, really spoke to the Blade Runner in me, and there's a lot of nostalgic awesomeness for Battlestar as well. That way, where they have just these random cutaways. And but the second show is so character driven, right? And I don't know this much, like, those contrasts between the characters were so clashy and so hard in this. Like, the dialogue is really missed, and you're kind of clicking along at a pace like, okay, yeah, and then it's the next scene. So it's like you're then recalling the information. I don't know if I was, like, feeling it as much as I was, like, trying to count it.
I think this episode for sure, and this is a thing we've noticed in previous episodes, is it falls into the trap of the previous episodes of just a lot of exposition. Something comes at you very quickly. Like in this scene where Dr. Chandri warns them about this hijacking that's coming, he's also, like, playing very coy about what they do on Outpost 9. And Nathan's basically able to guess what it is, but he'll neither confirm nor deny that he's essentially running an NSA-style intelligent listening system that's been designed for the government to monitor all communications for keywords, and that's how he got this information.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it's just like, you get, like, all of this stuff in, like, a 5-minute sitting, and you're like, wait, how much of this do I need to remember?
Well, it's an interesting point that you make, Jeff, and it's something that I've kind of noticed as now we're into episode 3, is the characters talk and talk and talk. And some of it's important and some of it's not important. And I'm not sure if it's just watching now things from a modern view, but it sometimes is hard, at least for me, to try to parse out what I'm supposed to be paying attention to, because they give a lot of information, and some of it's world building, some of it's character building, some of it's plot driven. So you're just like, what? How much of this am I supposed to pay attention to?
And coming in cold on episode 3, you're sort of just letting it happen and not expecting too much of yourself. And
enjoy the models.
Do you know what I mean? Like, exactly.
But so they have this meeting, they've learned about this hijacking that's coming, and they leave, and back on Earth, there's another cyber attack happening, this time at the Channel Tunnel. The same poetry lines come up, and then we get a very long scene that just amounts to 2 trains crashing into each other.
I love the screen, though. They had, like, the guys monitoring the train screen was on, I think it was like a glass see-through screen where you had what I assume was whatever the equivalent of train tracks are.
Yes, it just showed you what the channel was up to and where the trains were. This scene was fine, but it was also like these 2 coworkers have a long conversation about interoffice politics. And, like, I'm just like, does any of this matter? And it doesn't really. They need a scene to happen. So I'm just like, you're listening to the future politics of the Channel Tunnel railway system.
Yeah, because why not? I mean, and that's what this show is. It's something that you get over and over and over. It's just, there will be scenes like this where you're like, are they building these characters for a reason? Like, nope, not at all.
Meanwhile, though, Nathan, he has some other things to deal with other than hijackings and cyber attacks. There are 2 current Star Cops that he intends to, I guess, fire today. Or he's not really firing them. He's just kind of forcing them to resign. One of them is Pal Kenzie. She's an Australian that we actually saw very briefly in the first episode. But she's back now. And you know she's Australian because she's wearing kangaroo earrings.
I didn't notice the earrings.
She is. She's wearing kangaroo earrings, so you double down on that. And then another is an American named Hubble who needs to get fired.
Luke, is it true that much like when you go to Hawaii and they lay the wreath on you around your neck, they lay the flowers? It's the same in Australia, isn't it? They give you those kangaroo earrings.
Yeah, no, they
punch them right through the ear?
pierce your ears at the airport. But no, basically they're both kind of corrupt cops. Hubble, the American, he kind of gives in pretty gracefully off screen. He's like, all right, you caught me. I guess I'll leave my job. Whereas Kenzie's a little harder to shake off her job. Like when she shows up to be fired, she doesn't quite realize that's what she's there for. And the first thing she does is attempt to sell Nathan, the Star Cops boss, on buying a special Australian laser weapon that specially targets skin tones, which Thoreau is immediately like, you built a racist laser?
Yes. Yeah. For the black hand? No, just kidding.
Yeah, I guess so. But
the name racist laser didn't test well, though, so they were trying to come up with other names for it.
Which was it was just a very funny introduction to this character. But very quickly, Nathan's just like, I'm not here to buy this laser weapon, which maybe you own shares of the company. I'm here to fire you because, and Jeff, you won't know this, but in the last episode that we just watched, there was a big, dumb, bad cop on Earth who was looking into an investigation who got fired. And there was some... Jordan was sure this was going to happen, but there was some indication maybe he'd get hired to the Star Cops. And sure enough, old Davis is now part of the Star Cops. And Nathan immediately used him to do a sting operation to have her attempt to shake him down for money and record the whole thing. So she's been caught on video being corrupt. She's like, well, I guess I am fired.
Well, yeah, that's how episode 3 ends, right?
Well, exactly. This is where we are. Just Davis is part of the Star Cops, and he's helping get this Kenzie fired.
There's a lot of friends through conflict in this show, right?
It is true. These two. This is where these two are going to take a little trip because after he's kind of fired or force resigned these 2 Star Cops, Nathan is half. I don't know why this is a Star Cop problem, but he's kind of half assigned Box, his little personal assistant, to do some investigation into these cyber attacks. Which, by the way, Jordan, we've known he's had this Box for a while, and we've known people are like, oh, it's very expensive to own an AI, this little AI personal assistant. This episode, they're like, it's nobody has this. It's a one-of-a-kind prototype that never went into production. So now I'm just like, what is this thing?
I think they've slightly retconned things because they did mention in episode 1 or 2 that his father gave it to him and it was sort of cutting-edge technology, and everyone's like, wow, that's great. Only the best of the best have this little box. But now it's one-of-a-kind item. I think probably because maybe it creates too many plot holes if you have everyone that has this little mini supercomputer that answers everything with them at all time, and it's makes him special in that way.
Well, yeah, that's where you get your act of God, right? In this world, technology is always going to be God. So you need that device, right?
And I mean, Box does it here because just like using Google, Box looks up those 2 lines of poetry and just those 2 lines of poetry were written by Blake. And they're like, oh, you know what? When we were at Dr. Chandri's office, I noticed he had a book of Blake's poetry. Maybe we should go back and talk to him.
Now, here's the thing. If I'm Dr. Chandri and I only really like one poet, and it's, you know what I mean? Don't use that said poet's poetry in your nefarious plans, is all I'm saying. Pick a different poet.
WW. Yeah, Walter White. Yeah.
So Nathan goes back there, and he uses it as an excuse to return to visit old Dr. Chandri. Is that when they were looking at his personnel records, it's I guess against the law to not include your entire background, but he forgot to mention that he was the inventor of racist lasers. So
to be fair, we all try to scrub that from our resumes.
Well, I don't know what I'll ever find out about mine. That was why it was hard, really, to commit to the storyline because. Is that what we're talking about? It's
completely unnecessary for some.
It's almost something you wouldn't write that you couldn't write today. It's almost something that you would not be able to do this, even though it's almost a better way to approach it at this point. There's no way that they would allow that storyline. So you're kind of like allowing yourself to commit to this storyline of like, yeah, we're literally talking about things this bold and this broad, right?
Yeah. The trip back to like talk to him about this missing thing on his personal record is just an excuse for Nathan to basically like quiz him about these cyber attacks that have been happening. And it's very funny because very quickly Dr. Chandri, he gives up and he kind of just blows his entire scheme, which is a very complicated scheme. And I'm going to try to lay it out here for you guys. And you can tell me afterward if you understood this is what the plot of the show was about. So Dr. Chandri has invented an intelligent listening system for essentially NSI style like spying. However, the machine he built turns out doesn't work at all.
Right.
And he has daddy issues because his dad is like Elon Musk, and his dad built a multi-million-dollar company off of like, components that the entire world uses now. So the government asked Dr. Chandri to prove his intelligent listening machine by providing him information that the Black Hand Gang, they had heard the Black Hand Gang was going to hijack a ship, and they wanted him to scan communications to track them down. His machine doesn't work, so what he does is he just calls the Star Cops and pretends his intelligent listening machine found this information and assigns them to like basically do his job, is like find out information about this. And this is all just to buy time for him somehow. But what he's really done is he's used his position in his father's company to drop into the Channel Tunnel and this processing plant and implant a physical chip, which he calls a computer worm, which is a thing, but he's actually installing a physical chip into their computer, basically mainframe, which he's triggering using this poetry code that, is basically causing these accidents. And then his plan after these accidents have happened and killed all these people is he's going to say his intelligent listening system also picked up this piece of code. So he discovered it and his machine works. But when it picked up that code, it also blew up his system. Like he's basically
they can't check on it.
So they can't check on whether it worked or not. So this is just the most elaborate scheme to cover up the fact that his machine doesn't work. He's going to like blow up two systems, destroy his own outpost, and then get the Star Cops looking into this hijacking?
Well, the whole thing really comes down to it's fraud is what it is. It's a fraudulent business. And I don't know really, though, to what end other than his own insecurity with his feelings about himself and his status compared to his father.
He's purely saving face.
But in terms of something that kind of Jeff mentioned earlier, in terms of a viewer watching this, it's so complicated and so convoluted for a plot from get to point A to point B that I don't know who would be excited at the revelation of what the answer to the end of this episode is, because it's so complicated. Because you're right, because it's like, Jeff, what are the stakes?
Did you understand?
No, I mean, not really. You know what I understood is I understood the dynamics between the characters and the stakes for them. So I didn't really, and that's what I mean, is this first, episode 3 is very much centered in what the plot is. And so, you understand what's at stake as far as like, I agree, I disagree, out of these two characters, right? Someone agrees, someone disagrees. And then at the end, they come to terms. That's all you're really focused on. But there are so many. And because you're coming in, I was coming in cold, not you, but me, and not most people, but episode 3, you're like, who is everybody? And you're like, is this guy a bad guy? Is this girl a bad girl? You know what I mean? So with all that going on, no, it was very hard to follow.
I mean, I would agree with you, though. I think like the emotional arcs for the characters, or like what they wanted and what they didn't want, were clear. But when they tried to explain how the plot mechanics worked, that's when it was just like, I'm like, and they're explaining it to you all in one scene, and and not quickly. These are like long drawn out scenes, but I'm still like, slow down. Hold on, wait, who did what?
I don't want to reference Blade Runner again, but like it's kind of like the Tyrell scene at the end where, like, what has this all been about?
Right.
And it's like, even that, it's just like, simpler's better. It's about creation, or like, what is this about? It's about a racist
It's about
ID
saving
thing.
face.
Yes, right.
To Jeff's point, though, if you were a viewer coming in 1987 and you didn't know this show was on and it's Tuesday night and you're like, hey, what's this show? And you started watching this, you would be so confused as to what this world is, how do these characters interact, what is the plot? I mean, I don't know if that was the reason this show didn't make it, but I mean, if I had flipped to the channel, I'd have flipped back off because you have no idea what's happening.
You'd have to love models. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
You'd have to love
The look of things.
which I'm really excited to talk about episode 4, because then you're just like, oh fuck, I'd watch this show. Episode 3, you're kind of trying to make sense of everything, the world. It's such a world builder. And for me, I'm all down for world building. I have patience for that, and so that I have time to like care about these people. You know, and I think that's the trend these days. Is like people say, wait till episode 3 or 4. It really digs in. and I feel like this is not. You know, I'm from episode 3, cool world build, and then 4, I was hooked. You know, I don't know if I need 1 or 2, but the gang's all here. You know, by 4.
I think that's a good point, though. Is like a modern TV show where things build over 4 episodes and you're not really into the full group. This show feels in that way way ahead of its time. Like Kenzie is introduced in episode 1, which you didn't see, Jeff, but she's just on a screen. They talk to her for about 5 or 10 minutes. We know she's a star cop. We know what base she works on, but we don't see her again until she comes back to get fired for being corrupt. But even in episode 1, they imply that she like is fairly like corruptible. So like these seeds have been laid in the past, and it's just funny to see them like come to fruition this much later in the series.
Well, you're right, because it's basically episode 4 where we're going to have our cast that's going to be our characters. It's episode 4. They're all in place now. That's can't think of too many shows in the 1980s that trusted the viewer would stick around long enough to follow that serialization of those characters joining the team.
Because there's a moment in episode 4 where, what is her name?
Kenzie,
right? So there's a moment when Kenzie leaves with the American guy, you know, and he's all like super hitting on her. We'll talk about it. But, so, you know, she leaves. And when she leaves with him, there was a moment there where I'm like, oh, is she going to get turned by this guy? And then you're like, no, not Kenzie. You know what I mean? Like, I'm already...
You're already like, I'm not Kenzie. She wouldn't do that.
She wouldn't do that. You know, I'm already...
She only tried to sell that racist laser the previous episode.
Right, exactly. It's like, yeah, but she was doing, you know, but she did save the team, you know? And it's like, did she save the team or her own ass? And it's like, you know, people can change. Kenzie can change. I have hope.
Well, let's finish up this episode then, because essentially after Chandri lays out his plan, Dr. Chandri then also activates the worm on Outpost 9, and we basically get that big scene where, like, Nathan has to wrestle a laser gun out of his hand, and he kills Chandri, and then Nathan has to jump in one of these space rovers and, like, drive away as fast as he can away from the base before it explodes. And, like, they run a very tension-heavy music, but, like, essentially, you know, Nathan escapes the exploding base, Chandri is defeated, and then we get a newscast that explains the whole thing. Like, the newscast basically implies the whole thing was eventually covered up by the government, because the newscast just says, oh, an accident happened on the moon and Dr. Chandri was killed. Nothing wrong up there. But the side plot that's been happening alongside this is, if you've forgotten, this whole thing started off with a hijacking of this shuttle that's going to the moon, which the Starkups did very little to do anything about, even though that was the impetus for this episode, is to stop a hijacking. But Nathan has sent this dumb cop Divas down to Australia, because after he fired Kenzie, he's like, I would like you to go buy about 200 of those racist lasers for me. They'd be great for the Starkups.
That's what I'm talking about. Because just when you think you know where this show is and what the plot and everything, then this guy goes at the end and he's like, you know what? Let's pick up a couple. And you're like, wait a minute. Weren't these a bad thing? And you're like, yeah, but if we have the technology, you know, then we can get ahead of the technology, you know. And you think, hold on, who's good in this show? Like, who's the good guy?
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing was weird. Like, Nathan implies he doesn't want his team armed at all, but mostly he's just doing that, I guess.
Yeah, I don't need guns. Doesn't he say that to an American in the next episode?
He says that to Kenzie too, but I think he's just like messing with her.
Oh, he does say it to the Australian, which is ironic now.
But essentially, that's just to have a scene now where he's gone to Australia, he's bought a bunch of lasers, and now he gets back on the shuttle, which is just like a commercial airliner that comes back up to the moon. And it just so happens when Divas gets on the shuttle, Kenzie's also on the shuttle. She's going back to space because she's just going to get another job up in space somewhere. And of course, as you do with a coworker you just got fired, hey, maybe I'll sit with you.
Can I say, I really liked the look of the spaceship, though, because it looked half like a train and half like a plane, but their seats still run along the sides of the ship, but the part where I assume like the steward or person taking tickets or whatever, is an elevated, so they're all much lower. So it's like you just watch their legs go by. I don't know why it really tickled me.
Yeah, their legs and their crotches. I mean, aren't you downwind from a lot of traffic? Like,
Yes.
it must suck to be like seated down in that compartment, right?
Also, I didn't see any stairs. How did they get down there? Did they have to hop down and then climb back out?
Yeah, it was a weird like S pattern down. It was a weird ramp. Like, and it's just a half, and a quarter apple box to get down, right? They're just not showing you to the seats, right? They're up on a riser.
You guys are just watching this set design being like, what is happening here?
Well, kind of. You're kind of breaking it apart. Like, how did he get down and sit down? Like, how's this happening? But that's kind of what the show really does well, is it either watched 2001 before they made every episode and pointed at it and was like, we need to do this type of thing. And they were like, well, how do we do it, on our budget? And it's like, well, it's about parallax and cross and, So I think that's pretty much like what's appealing about the show and what it nails in that episode, right? And what it's really relying heavily on. I think it kind of knew how plot heavy it was. And so that it was a world building episode. You were saying at the top, these were directed by two different directors. And I don't know what kind of input they had on the story, but definitely in the way it was told and its focus, you can feel, because watching them again, I would watch it knowing all this. It'd be interesting to see and just really pay attention to the script to see how similar the scripts really are and how a director's influence can really affect the way that the viewer's getting it. Because the first one's so plot true. The second one, I don't even remember the plot, but the fourth one, man, you're there for all the characters, and it's about the characters, that fourth one.
It is interesting, and I mean, maybe it is a little bit of the team getting set up in this episode to like help sell the next one, or maybe it is just like this director doesn't know how to deal with like all of these dialogue-heavy scenes. Because in this scene on this plane, Diva sits next to Kenzie, and they have a conversation about how she can't come back to Earth; she needs to go to space. Like once she's would you kind of been there and lived there, like you want to go back? And Divas is like kind of new to space, but he's getting used to it. And also Divas is just like, hey, I heard you got fired. I hate policewomen, but I love women. You wanna flirt a little on this plane?
He was right into it. I think he mentions he's been married several times.
Five times, and then he goes, I told you I love cuddles. Or very cuddly, right?
He's very cuddly.
Very
He gives the sweetest smile. I'm very cuddly. But this space shuttle they're on returning to the moon, this is going to be the one that's hijacked, because very soon there's an announcement is made over the intercom that sounds very mundane, but Kenzie, as an ex-Star Cop, knows that's an indication a crime is happening. So they grab the space lasers and they go check out. These hijackers have a knife and they're holding a stewardess hostage, and Divas pretends to be a drunk trying to find a drink on the plane, and like saves the stewardess so that Kenzie can swoop in and laser one of the guys.
By the way, how many times, it must be a trope, do you see a character pretending to be drunk for some other means? We just saw it in the TV movie we watched about pool. It always works every time. If you pretend you're drunk, you can get in anywhere and get anything.
Everyone just lets you through. They're like, he's just drunk.
Yeah.
And then there's one of these hijackers. There's completely inexplicable because they never explain what's happening. He just pulls out a glass ball, and everyone's like, "Oh no, a glass ball!" And then he throws it across the room, and Kenzie has to like dive and grab it. I guess we're supposed to assume there's like a biological agent inside of that glass ball.
Yeah, it was something like that. Either a bomb or a chemical weapon of some sort. Anyways, it was whatever it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be very scary.
I think it was the inspiration for The Rock.
Michael Bay was watching this. This was where he got the ideas for explosions and people running around.
Exactly.
And then the plot device for The Rock.
And Transformers, with that opening sequence. Like this, we found the beginning of the inception of Michael Bay's.
Before he makes any movie,
style.
The entire crew has to watch this episode of Star Cops.
That's right.
What I like, though, in Star Cops, everything, even if it's supposed to be a more cinematic, larger moment, it's always handled with the least aplomb possible. And it's just like, even this being this glass ball floating, I mean, she has to jump and do this big scene to catch it, but like she could have just casually walked over and picked it out of the air because it goes so slow.
Their action sequences are ambitious, if not well executed.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to explain it. Yeah, they're ambitious, but you're just like, who decided this was exciting?
At any rate, having saved the day, saved all these people on this thing and stopped the hijacking, what I love is Kenzie's just like, I've got an idea to fuck over Nathan and get my job back. And Divas is just like, yeah, sure, I'll help you out with that. I don't care. I have no allegiances to anyone. She throws a press conference, I guess immediately after the hijacking happened, where she's just like, us Star Cops, we're out here saving the day, but I gotta thank my boss Nathan for putting me out here to do this. I'm definitely not fired. I'm definitely working for the Star Cops. And it just cuts back to the station, and Nathan's like fuming, and Thoreau's like, well, guess she reinstated herself. Welcome back to the force.
She's an opportunist. She took the shot she saw.
It's very funny. This is how she gets back on the team. We'll get on to the next episode now, because I think everyone has a lot more to talk about that. I just want to make one quick side note. I want to see if either of you noticed this. So we see them in this shuttle on the ground at first, and then we see them go into atmosphere, because like we see a lot of the travels of these people. Once Kenzie and Devis are in space, did you notice that Devis's hair was redone to make it look like it was floating?
I didn't notice.
They like put gel in his hair. Like it was very like patted down to begin with, and then once he's in space, they like gelled it out so it looks like it's frizzed out a bit for the rest of the time he's in space. So they like the hair department came in and gave him 0G hair, and I was just like, good for you. I love this hair team. At any rate, we'll move on. Here is the IMDb summary for episode 4, Trivial Games and Paranoid Pursuits.
What do you mean he wasn't a good crook? Well, the stupid bastard got caught. I mean, if you're going to pay somebody off, it's best to make sure he's bright enough to make it worth your while.
Somebody paid him off? No, why the hell would anybody want to do anything like that?
Well, to keep his mouth shut, I should imagine.
You don't know.
As Spring attempts to persuade the skeptical Americans to allow him to open a Star Cops office on their space station, the Ronald Reagan, he is asked to investigate the disappearance of a scientist, Dr. Harvey Goodman, from the Ronald Reagan Station. And that slightly abbreviated summary was courtesy again of Gus F.
Jeff mentioned this character at the beginning of this podcast. He's going to be the sort of point of conflict. He's this American character on the Ronald Reagan Space Station.
Commander Griffin.
Commander Griffin. And what I liked about him was he was an American as drawn by like a Soviet viewpoint or something. Like he's as American as American. Like he's such a stereotype. He's just like, he's wearing a baseball cap and he's smoking a cigar and he's like, I love baseball. And he's just, I really, really enjoyed it. It was probably one of my favorite things in this show is just what a caricature he was.
He's wearing a Brooklyn Dodgers hat and a Dallas Cowboys t-shirt.
I know. I loved it. Not only that, Jeff, but it was just, I think the point was like, he loves sports. Am I right? American. Because he had pennants and posters on the wall and they were all different sports teams, different sports. It's just like, he has no allegiances. It's just, he wants to see a ball thrown through an apparatus.
There's a bird's eye view of the whole place that's an octagon, right? It's like foreshadowing of the whole MMA thing, and it's over a pool table in amongst the shrine of sports that you're describing. So it's like, yeah, it's very much like
he's amazing. He's chomping a stogie the entire time. He is a perfect caricature of like un-American. It's very funny.
It's like the 54th star, is an octagon. Aren't there actually 53 states? Anyway.
I don't know. It's a good question. This episode starts off, though, with a space salvage team who we'll see intercut throughout the entire episode, but we're not going to go back to them because it's just like they're basically out in space, and it starts with them finding one of these space station modules just floating around in space. I guess it's floating towards the sun, and they're like, payday, space salvage, let's grab this. And it's, again, the fun miniature work. This is some of the cool stuff that this show does, and it's very funny. This is just my personal thing, but I love the trope of space salvage as a job in the future. Mm-hmm. There's a good Japanese graphic novel called Planets about it, something like that, and then even a recent Netflix movie called Space Sweepers, and it's always about. And I just love movies and things about like I do salvage in space. I don't know why, it makes me laugh.
This is the one scene that I noticed in terms of the different sort of art direction of the two episodes. Whenever you see these salvage people, and we cut to them throughout the episode, it's always very dark. You only see the light that's coming through the window through space, and you don't really know what's happening. And I like that it's just like these two weird people kind of bickering over space garbage.
Now that I know that this is a different director who came in after the first 3 episodes, we've seen this, Jeff, before, is that like they'll open on a spacecraft in space that does not have our lead characters in it. But previously what they've done is they've just shown the model and then just did like ADR work over top of it. And it's kind of like an ugly way of doing a scene. You just get the ADR of the people inside, but you never meet them, even though they're characters in the episode. Whereas it felt like maybe this director came in was just like, listen, it's fine. I don't need a lot of money. You don't need to build me a space shuttle set. I'm going to light it really dark. You're never going to see the interior, but I can't shoot this sequence and never meet these characters because it works so much better getting to get in there with the two characters.
What's it? Yeah, episode 4 is such a better show. It's such a better show. It's such a better tone setter. You start in darkness on two people and like what it might actually be like to live in space. Yeah, like the whole concept of like junk people in space, you know. It's like, hey, we could survive if we do this, and that's what they're discussing. And you feel the intimacy because we're in one, you know, tight space with them, right? And it's all one hole, and they like live in a hole. Like that's what it sort of feels like, right? So it's a huge contrast from like the fucking Michael Bay opening of episode 3. But yeah, it's such a better tone setter for like the humanity in space. Yeah,
100%.
So that's the focus of this episode, it seems. And then,
it doesn't seem like the space scavenging is a great career. Is not the sense you get.
No.
It's a pretty hard scramble life up there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And what the episode 3 misses that I think episode 4 really does is it aligns character with politics, which the third episode is like not even focused on. It's just like, we need another shot of it exploding. It doesn't care to like nail the nuance of the dynamics, the blocking and the shot dynamics. The choices of episode 4 are so much smarter. The blocking and the camera movement is so simple, precise. Everybody steps in. You feel when everyone comes together in a scene because that's what the blocking and the shot is doing. The other one is just like covering it and cutting and, you know, and you can tell where the money's going and you can tell where the time is going. But this one, it's all in one shot as much as possible, and it's doing as much as it can in that one shot. And it's really focused on why.
Good prelude to this episode, Jeff. This scene from these space savages goes down to Earth, where we see like a very suburban neighborhood in what I would assume is Colorado due to its location near mountains. And the theme music to 2001 is kind of playing. Kids are running around. And we cut to a character named Dilly Goodman, and she's calling up to the main U.S. space station, the Ronald Reagan, trying to track down her missing brother, who's a scientist there, Dr. Goodman. And I love the AI receptionist that picks up this video phone call when it starts. Her hair is...
She had crazy hair, right?
Her hair is essentially a triangle.
Yeah.
That's the sort of stuff I like in science fiction. I want a little bits of world building of like, hey, guess what? In the future, everyone's tie is weird. That's what I want to see. And I liked it that this lady, it's like, you call, there's still a bureaucrat. She's, if anything, worse as a bureaucrat, and she's got a crazy triangle hair. I was all into it.
I was like, oh, look at Dora. She's still exploring.
Yeah, well, it's very funny because they present her as a person, but very quickly we realize she's just like an AI receptionist.
She's an animated thing, yeah.
Yeah, a PR graphic, they call her, I believe. Mm-hmm. And it's just very funny because they've also programmed this AI to have a very, very snotty attitude, which I really liked.
Yeah, she's not helpful. Basically, this lady, what's her name? Last name's Goodman, right?
Dilly Goodman.
Dilly Goodman's calling, looking for her brother, and she keeps sort of hitting the wall every time. And the feeling you have is that she's been going through this a little bit. She's looking for her brother, and every step along the way, someone is sort of putting a barrier in front of her.
Yeah, they basically claim on the Ronald Reagan, he never came here. He was never a scientist here. That never happened. Your brother was never here.
Isn't it essentially an allegory for trying to get your cable set up? She keeps calling to try to find her brother, and they're just like, we can't send someone out today.
Your address doesn't even exist.
Yeah. She's like, I don't think we have your district. Aren't you with Shaw?
On the character development front, we're back in the moon base space office of the Star Cops, and Kenzie's back at work, but Nathan basically has assigned her to basically do just like filing duty. He's not going to give her any cases. He's not going to give her any good work, and she's annoyed by it. And I don't know. I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I really enjoyed this scene off the top because she's annoyed by what she has to do, and she's like, I'm not going to take this anymore. So she calls up Nathan, who's on his way. He's on a ship going to the Ronald Reagan. He calls her up, and she's just like, I'm going to submit my resignation. Nathan's like, great. And she's like, wait, you didn't let me finish. I'm going to submit my resignation if you don't give me more work. He's like, great, submit your resignation. I love it.
There's the conflict here that even though she's wormed her way back into the job, he does not want her there, and he is purposely, if still a, it's like it's not an HR issue. He's letting her work, but he's giving her the worst work possible so that he'll force her to quit. And then he's like, oh well. It was pretty well done, I thought, and I thought it told us a little bit about his character and her character as well.
It was a nice, funny scene because it was a classic, like a person trying to get a one up on somebody who has no leverage, and like they just do it so dry but so quick. They're like, great, resign. Oh, what's that? Okay, well, great, resign.
Yeah.
But I saved the company. Well, that's not your job to save the company.
It does set up a nice dynamic between the two, because you know that the writers are going to want to give him some sort of grudging respect for her, and she has to somehow find a way to gain said respect. Yeah. So you just know that's happening, and they handle it in a pretty good way through this, I thought.
And it's so much better than the way that they do it in episode 3, where it's just like, she's a woman.
Yeah.
Like that's like it's like, I don't trust women. I think it's like the vibe I get in episode 3. Where in episode 4, it's just like, yeah, very much just about who she is as a person and who he is.
Nathan, meanwhile, he arrives at this Ronald Reagan Space Station, and we get some of the best miniature work they've ever done. It's like this huge station that's rotating while it orbits the Earth. Very 2001, as Jeff pointed out.
It's sort of like a long, like kind of a cylinder, but then it has this arm that sticks out and spins around. I don't know if did they explain why it's set like that?
I was assuming that it's like creating its own gravity, because they do
That's
have
exactly
a reference during the shot. They use the voiceover over model really effectively there. And that's what I mean, the whole episode is on point, because it's like, why are we cutting to this? Well, because we're referencing the gravity. So that's why we're showing it.
Yeah, it's exactly it. When he gets there, he'll dock with this spaceship and zero-G walk kind of through the corridors.
Oh, right.
Artificial gravity, yeah.
Get on the elevator that takes him out to these spinning parts. And it's great because he opens this airlock, and it's an amazing shot reflected in his mirror of his helmet of just like the Earth and this huge like spinning moment. And he opens up and he's just like, Jesus Christ, I got to ride this across this gap of space. It's like it's a nicely done shot. And it takes him out to basically a gravity-centric place because of the centrifugal force, where we meet this villainous Commander Griffin the American, who has used gravity to set up a pool table in this room.
Yeah, at the center of it is this octagon. Yeah, shrine to sports.
And as it says in the summary, like Nathan's there because he fired Hubble, which was the U.S.'s space cop, and he wants to get some more space cops on these U.S. stations. But both Griffin and the U.S. State Department are not down with international policing. They're not interested in helping out, and they're not going to put a cop on this space station.
And this is consistent with what we've seen since episode 1. They've sort of slowly kind of peppered in that the Americans are having some conflict with the rest of the international countries that are in space, because they've been doing things like clearly setting up military bases and pretending they're not military bases, and at the very least not cooperating with other countries. So they've already kind of set this tension up in some ways.
Isn't the whole thing where the English guy and the British guy and the American guy are both very much friendly to each other, but very, very quickly you can tell just when everything's going on, they're having a great time. They've established their differences, but that they're good with it. The American guy brings up his beef, right? And he's like, you got this Russian promoted 2 years earlier than you should have. And that's a problem for us. And it wasn't really his turn yet, right? We all take turns internationally, and you push the Russian ahead of us, or quicker into the line.
And I mean, that is kind of the side plot of this episode, is that back on that moon base, and Jeff, you won't know all this, so I'll fill you in a little bit, but clearly you picked up on most of it, is a couple episodes ago, there was a French base commander who basically endangered people's lives to test his cryonics technology, and they basically got him fired. And what we're seeing is he's been replaced by this Russian-based coordinator, a gentleman named Dr. Alexander Krivenko, who specializes in space medicine. And this is sort of where the push and pull between Nathan, our British space cop, and the American commander is that, like, the Americans knew the Russians were up next, but because Nathan got the French guy fired, they didn't have time to prepare for what they assume is just going to be a sleeper agent. They just assume if Russia's sending someone up to coordinate, he's going to be a spy of some sort, and they're not ready for that yet. And so they don't want to involve the Star Cops because they can't trust the Star Cops.
And essentially, in this world in 2027, the Cold War is still going
on,
strong.
yeah.
Raging.
Yeah, and he's like, we police our own. Like, that was nice of you to help out and stuff, but that was our problem, so, like, keep out of our problems. And that's sort of like where it spikes the tension between those two characters, and it's sort of like it really resonates the politics with the character, right? It becomes a personal thing, like, you did this to me,
And this Dr. Kravenko, the new coordinator, we'll see him throughout the episode. His sort of subplot is he's just started. He really wants to learn all the interworkings of this moon base, and he's really hanging around the Starcop office, and mostly with Divas, because Divas is the one left to work at the office. But they all are a little like, he's overly friendly, he's a little too inquisitive. They're all very suspicious of him from the get-go, even the Starcop
Well, it is
themselves.
An interesting thing, Luke, because Nathan at one end is having to defend this decision to have the British decision to have this guy be part of the team against the Americans, but at the same time, his whole team is very wary of the guy. So it's sort of like putting up the political face you need to, and at the same time being like, I do kind of agree with him, but I can't publicly agree with him.
Yeah.
And like back in the Starcop's office, this Krachenko, he really wants to know, like, how do you solve crimes up here? Let me give you a hypothetical crime. What if somebody was kidnapped for political reasons? Well, what would you do about that? And at that exact moment, old Dilly Goodman calls the Starcops to report her brother missing, and they like immediately equate the two. The Starcops are like, weird that you gave us a hypothetical that is not really exactly much like this case we got.
To be fair, it's a very odd example to bring out of nowhere and then have that exact thing happen. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, it's too coincidental. And I think he even kind of plays it almost like that sort of like mustache twirling sort of way of like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if that happened? Oopsie daisy.
I loved it.
That is the tone they're trying to say. Is like, isn't this a weird coincidence? Maybe this man can't be trusted.
I loved it. It was such like it was such a fake out. I mean, it spikes the whole thing right away with like who's on whose side. Again, if you're coming in cold episode 3 and 4, you're like, oh, this must be a big thing about this show. Is like the intrigue of the murder mystery of it all. Like who done it here?
I think you're right though, Jeff, and it's interesting. This episode, I think, intentionally or otherwise, does a better job of setting the tone of what this universe is than the other episodes, simply through not worrying so much about the mystery and the plot of a murder or a terrorist plot or something, but focusing on the actual interpersonal differences between not only people on the same team, but these international countries. And I think you do get a better sense of this world. And I felt the same thing. I thought this was a much better episode.
And I feel with the characters too, like that's what the show reveals itself really to be in this episode. I think is like this is about people coming to terms through their differences and through conflict, right? Like, I mean, there's healing through this, so like no guns,
But yeah, Dilly gives them her case, and they're immediately obviously suspicious of the Russian, and this all seems to be weirdly political, so they don't want to use comm channels. And to kind of build that character arc for Kenzie, they send her off to the Reagan to meet with Nathan to fill him in on this missing persons case. And essentially what they've found looking into it is that it seems odd. Like, perhaps there's something else going on with the case. Maybe it's a Russian conspiracy to drive up some sort of international tension. They're not sure. But essentially, Goodman is found to have no records. Like, there's not just no records of Goodman on the Reagan. They look into his school records, and there's never been a Goodman at Caltech or MIT. Like, there's just no record of this man anywhere. And as Nathan points out, it is a little bit of shoddy detective work, because he's just like, wait, are you telling me there's never been a Dr. Henry Goodman there, or never been a Goodman at MIT? And they're like, a Goodman. He's like, all right, well, clearly somebody has just scrubbed all the Goodmans out of the case.
I like the idea, though, that let's say you're, some villain of some sort, and you give it to your henchman. You're like, here's the deal. I need you to clean these records, get rid of this guy. And he's like, yeah, I'll do it. And they just clear all the records. And it's just like, you've just done a terrible job of the one thing
easy.
You had to do.
Control F, Goodman, delete.
I mean, the show almost like lets you know that it's smart right away, so you don't have to worry about it. Like it's in episode 3 it doesn't do it, but in episode 4 very much it does, where it puts a lot of one up on itself, where it introduces something, then trumps it, then trumps it, then trumps it. So you stop trying to one up the show and you just start watching it, right?
Yeah.
And you just are like, okay, let's watch this thing try to outdo itself, right? Which is great, because every time, exactly, now it's like, oh, what a coincidence. You're here to investigate this casual thing and casual things going on, and this thing just happens to happen, right? So it just loves, I think, to just throw a ball in just to see how many balls it can hold in the air.
And now we've got Kenzie and Nathan on this ship, and we've seen the animosity, but they're forced to work as partners now, and we can, and it kind of builds their characters out. Like the Commander Griffin really wants to aggressively flirt and touch Kenzie, which I'm just like, oh, this is bad news right here.
He's a real creeper.
Very handsy.
But essentially, he invites her to play a game of pool, so that gives Nathan a chance to snoop around while they're doing that. Although, and this is just for Jordan and the listener, since we just watched this TV movie, Kenzie's Australian, so I assume they played knuckleball, right? Hard knuckle? Hard knuckle, that's what it's called.
What I love that. That's only interesting for the 2 people who listened to the previous episode.
Jeff, Hard Knuckle was a TV movie about Australians in the post-apocalyptic future playing pool.
Oh, nice.
So I just couldn't help but think about that. At any rate, this distraction basically allows Nathan to snoop around the commander's office. It's all for naught. Like, he looks around his computer, but there's still no records of this Goodman character anywhere. And all this really leads to is that he looks around, finds some information, and then he forgets his box on the commander's desk when he leaves, which is very funny because the box is like talking out loud saying, hey, you're forgetting me on the desk. Don't leave.
I'm still active or something, right?
Obviously, lots of times people, they forget their maybe very expensive sunglasses or cell phone or whatever. But they've made the point now several times that this thing is like a 1 in a million item. You would think he would just never let that out of his grasp, and he's so casual with it. Like, he just goes to sleep and leaves it on the wall, and he's like working. It's just in the background. It's like, man, this thing's priceless. Don't just leave it in a room.
His dad gave him a one, right? It's a token from his father, right?
Yes.
The only one he has. That was ahead of its time, like word of God type thing, right? Like, this thing will solve, like, this is Google in your conversation, the person in the room who knows just too much, right? And he left it there.
It's very funny. It is a little awkwardly staged and doesn't quite.
Well, I think maybe Kenzie threw him off his game. What it was, he's so frustrated with her, he just got distracted.
No, maybe that's what it is.
I'm starting to like this woman. I can't think straight.
While this is happening, though, Thoreau has gone down to Earth to do his own investigation into the Dilly Goodman character. And what we see is he goes down to that house in Colorado, finds it completely empty, and we get those classic shots of, like, the POV camera from the woods, like, someone's watching him. And that someone sneaks up behind him and karate chops him in the throat.
Knocks him out.
Way more effective than 12 shots of an exploding warehouse.
It's very funny. That was very much of its time where you would get karate chopped into unconsciousness in a sci-fi show.
I was like, oh wow, they've got the what is that? The Vulcan grip or something?
Yes, the nerve pinch. Is that what it is?
Yeah. I assume it was some future one-hit thing that now everybody knows how to do.
Yeah, if you go to the right schools, you'll get this like karate chop that's really good. But essentially, this guy who's knocked Kenneth unconscious during his investigation, he's one of Griffin's men up on the space station, and he was sent down there to kind of take care of this sister Dilly. And we get a scene where, like, kind of one of the few scenes where we leave our main characters and we actually get to see the villains talk about their plan. And essentially, they're now are like, okay, if the Star Cops sent someone down here, they are on to what we're up to on the Ronald Reagan. I think we need to change tactics. Like, they're getting way too close to the thing we're trying to cover up here. And kind of like they do in some of these episodes, the villains are maybe a little too eager to give in. This time they at least lay it out a bit better. The idea that, like, Griffin's like, they're too close. We better, like, try to get this done. So he's just like, I'm going to try to make a deal with this Nathan guy, and hopefully we can cover this whole thing up. And so essentially what we see is Griffin goes to visit Nathan. He's like, oh, you left your box on my desk. I thought I'd just return it and ask if you wanted to talk to me about something.
I kind of liked it. I thought the character was like, he sort of knew when he was beat. So it's like, well, I'm going to make the best of this situation, and I think I can negotiate something. I'm going to lose still, but I can get something out of this.
Yep.
Yeah. And his plan basically is he tells Nathan he will make sure that he can get 3 space cops assigned to the Ronald Reagan if the Goodman investigation just goes away. Just forget about this Goodman investigation. I'll get you your 3 star cops. And it's funny, I couldn't tell how this was played. Like, Nathan agrees, and I thought, oh, so he's going to take this deal and work the politics of it. But then he also seems confused that he was making a deal afterward. Like, he didn't know what was happening. I was a little confused. But essentially, Kenzie has her own plan because she videotapes basically this, like, illegal offer being made and then uses it against Griffin to be like, I learned this from my teacher, Nathan, to secretly videotape people and blackmail them. So let's do this instead.
Well, I thought that wasn't that they had a plan, right? They
Okay, do you think so? They were working.
They ran on it together. That's what I mean.
so
I think
too.
that was the whole point. Is like that was Britain and Australia coming together over their differences to beat the Americans.
There's one thing they can get along about.
It's
is
fuck.
take it down the Americans.
You know, we're gonna have a cigar after this, but it's not with that asshole. You know what I mean?
All right. Well, so I must admit, I misread the scene for sure. But essentially, what happens now is he's like, Griffin just gives in. He explains everything that happened. Like, Dr. Goodman was on the Ronald Reagan, but he was doing banned biological warfare research on a, quote, space bug.
It's like a virus.
I could tell that they were in cahoots when she started to throw her feminine wiles at him, right? And they were leaving the room together. He was getting all handsy, and we could tell that it was inappropriate. But then Kenzie was playing into it, and we know she knows how to take advantage of a situation, which is what our lead character is not a huge fan of, is that she is corruptible that way. And then what he learns about her, and you know what she always believed about herself, is that she was doing it for the right reasons, right?
She has a certain skill set that can be put to good use.
Exactly. And so this is him realizing, you know, how they can work together. You know, they both realize it, how they can work together. Let
me mention one thing though. The recording she takes in the future with all their technology is a terrible, terrible recording. It just looks awful, and I'm like, this is what you're blackmailing the guy with? It's all like grainy and terrible.
Well, it looks like the Dora the Explorer. I mean, I feel I feel like that was a setup for a future episode where you realize that PR thing is not going to be a PR thing. You're going to realize that they're setting that up like it is a PR thing, so they can use it in a different one to reveal that it isn't. You know what I mean?
Oh, you think they're seeding more and more to come.
That's the one thing you learn, I think you learned just from those two episodes, really, is like, and as you're pointing out in this conversation, it's like you saw Kenzie once in the first episode, and here she is come full term on the team by the fourth, so maybe this, you know, technology thing. And
they are very good at seeding future plots. That's 100% sure. So like for you to see that, it could very well be true because the creator's very good at that. Jumping back to this sort of space bug, basically, Griffin pulls out an old USB storing in like a closet somewhere. And it's like, here, watch the security camera footage of basically Dr. Goodman accidentally releases the space bug in his module. He dies. The most hilarious death. The poor actor is just like, oh, I'm dead now.
I like, though, that they have it ready. It's like whenever they need a laugh, they just pull out that USB. They're like, hey, you want to watch old Goodman die again? It's pretty funny.
It's dark.
Fun side note. The trivia for this episode at IMDb, there's one trivia piece that was like, this actor found it very painful and uncomfortable to be strapped in and floating in zero G's. I'm like, which actor was that? I scrolled up, I'm like, the guy who played Goodman. He was in like 30 seconds of the show.
That they're like, cut him. He's too much of a whiner. He can only float once.
But yes, they basically now know he died of the space bug, and Griffin had the entire module sealed, shot into space, and then he essentially bribed Hubble, the other corrupt cop they fired last episode, the American, because they're, you know, pals, they're Americans, to essentially cover up that Goodman was ever anywhere in space. This is where that corruption came in that we saw from the previous episode. This is why they don't want to put another space cop up there. They used to have one. He was corruptible. They don't want a straight-laced space cop. This is kind of the whole plot of this, is like they had to cover up some illegal weapons research. They didn't have their man on the inside of the Star Cops, and now they don't want to play ball with the Star Cops anymore.
Yeah.
And it's not Goodman's sister.
Well, that's it. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They were sure they did because Goodman was solo. They didn't think he had any family who could track him down. They're like, but this sister came out of nowhere. And Nathan's just like, I don't think it is his sister.
Yeah, well, that's basically what it was. Even though they did a kind of sloppy job of clearing the records, they basically thought, well, he doesn't have any family anyway, so no one's going to look for him. So even if we were messy about it, it doesn't matter. And then the sister came out of the blue and started looking into things, and what you find by the end of the episode is it's not actually his sister.
Well, I really liked this about the show, and at the end of the episode is, you know, there's people just as smart as, if not smarter than, the space cops. You know, there's other things out there that, you know, that are a threat. Like there's a threat out there, if not, you know, a challenge.
We can talk about that a little too, because what happens is everyone's very concerned that this Dilly is maybe a Russian plant trying to expose this American thing to like seed trouble. But what it kind of comes out is Dilly is actually a reporter, an American reporter who changed her name.
World Press Association is who she works with.
She changed her name to Dilly Goodman in order to like pull this scam. And at the end of the episode, she confronts basically some government officials and Griffin who are trying to still cover it up. She like walks them into the middle of a press conference where they realize the whole thing, the whole cover-up's exposed, and they've all been exposed for this biological warfare.
I thought that it was really well done. I mean, cheesy as it was really well done. Where they were walking almost like it felt like off of a flight, right? And they're all walking in cahoots together. And she's saying like, "Well, gentlemen, that really worked out for all of us, didn't it?" And they're like, "Yeah, that was great. We all did great things." And then she comes around. She's like, "Yeah, tell me more about those great things." And to this camera and these other reporters, I'm Betty Dennett. I'm April O'Neil from Channel 6 News. You know what I mean? And I wasn't really Dilly. I was this other person the whole time. So it was kind of this. At first, when they spike the whole story with, is it the sister? Is it not the sister? Like, is it Mrs. Mulberry? Isn't it? Like, is there a Mrs. Mulberry? Like, is this Chinatown in space? What is this? So
Right.
So it's really great because it's very shadowy and it really plays to the lighting actually in this episode, which was not a thing in the previous episode. There's a whole episode that's only backlit and they're in darkness at one point. Two of the characters, and it's very it really plays on the shadowy and the espionage, which I think isn't that what all space movies really are? It's about submarine stuff. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's certainly more of a noir style this episode than previous episodes have been.
Absolutely.
Circling us back to those space salvagers who we saw at the start, they kind of come back in at the end here because they get back to the moon base. They show up in the Star Cop office, and I guess when you get some salvage, you have to register it, make sure nobody else owns it, and if no one else has reported it missing, it's your salvage, baby. Payday.
We don't know who they're selling it to. I'm assuming Ferengis, but someone's buying it.
And it's really smart. That's where the show shows you no, we thought about this, so stop worrying about this, right?
Absolutely. And Divas is still there with this Dr. Krivenko, who we're all still suspicious about it. Does this leak of the Americans' cover-up have anything to do with the Russians? And we kind of get this sequence at the end where the salvagers show up. They're like, we got this thing. Divas is like, nobody's registered it. It's all yours. Grab your blowtorch and cut right into it. You can take whatever's inside. And we, as the audience, know it's full of biological weapons. So we see them in a hangar starting to cut into it. And as they're about to break into it and theoretically release a biological agent onto the moon, Dr. Krivenko sort of steps out of the shadows and says, "Oh, hey, isn't it odd that it's welded from the outside? Maybe we shouldn't open it," and essentially diverts the catastrophe.
Mm-hmm.
But also implies that he knows more than he's been letting on this whole time. So we are not sure if he's good or bad, or if he's in the middle, or what his intentions will be as the series progresses.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little confused by this because basically as it ends, the entire Space Cop team is like, well, that was very suspicious that he did that and saved us all, right? That's very suspicious. But Nathan's kind of like, I actually think it was just a coincidence because I know that the reporter wasn't working for the Russians. So I think maybe he just is actually a keen investigator. So I didn't know where I'm supposed to fall on this. They leave it a little nebulous as to is he in on it, or is he just going to be a cool star cop?
Well, and this is where I think it really saved itself, but that's the problem with the previous episode, that it really doesn't be able to, the show is so smart that it tries to show you how smart it is at the end.
Right.
At the end of each episode, there's so many is it, or is it? There's a lot of that, and when I think the audience wants some sense of okay, I am as smart as the show, but I or I'm okay with it being smarter than me. But at the end of each episode, such huge information and stuff is thrown at you again in a challenge. But you're already kind of satisfied. You're already kind of oh, I feel like I've landed where the show wants me to land.
Right.
But then it does one more little or is it at you, and you're just okay, wait, and it almost extinguishes.
Pump the brakes.
Yeah, it almost extinguishes the great journey it just took you on.
Well, I mean, that covers both of these episodes, so maybe we should get into the rating of these episodes. And I just got to say, this series for us, this has to be the best episode titles of any series we've ever watched. I love the titles of these series.
I agree.
Let's do some ratings for Intelligence Listening for Beginners. That was the first episode. Jeff, we do this out of 10 stars. So you can do it critically. You can do it by your enjoyment level. It's totally up to you how you want to rate out of 10 stars for this. So what would you like to give the first episode you watched of this?
Well, all my stars are going to be on an enjoyment level because fuck critique. I would say a 6 or 7.
Which one is it?
6, 7, 6.5 then.
6.5. All right. You know what, Jeff? I'm giving it the exact same score. I think it's a 6.5. There's lots of fun, good stuff in it, but it is just like it ends up being a bit of a convoluted mess, which is something we've seen this show do before. This is still not finding its legs this episode. It's a 6.5 as well.
I don't know if we've ever had this happen, but I'm also going to give it a 6.5. So that's 3 for 3. We all feel pretty much exactly the same about this. I think it's better than the first 2 episodes, at least in my opinion. But to your point, Luke, it hasn't quite found its legs, and I think it does in the next episode.
Yeah, well, let's do the rating for Trivial Games and Paranoid Pursuits. Jeff, what about the second one? You seem to like it more, so I'm curious to see what your rating will be for the second one.
Going from 3 into 4, I think, just automatically bumps 4's score. It's just such a superior episode, so it just bumps the score instantly. But as a standalone episode, I feel like I would give it a slightly lower score, and only by half. So I guess I'll have to say 8.5. And I would almost just say 9 automatically, only because of everything in my head. Like, when was this made? Like, this was great. Like, I really enjoyed this. Like, I felt at the end, like, I would watch this show, but I don't know if that was a result of having seen 3 and then gone into 4. So I'll say 8.5. 8.5.
I think it's a fair rating. Here's what I would say, and we've watched a bunch more of these than you, so I'm coming with a little more information into these things, is this one is clearly this is the promise the show has had that I've liked so far. Like, I'm like, this show has promise, but it hasn't landed it. It's starting to come into focus now. I think one thing they did right this episode, which they tried to do in the previous one but didn't do it quite well, is like they focused on one crime, one mystery. All the characters worked together on one mystery, whereas previous ones, they would have 2 disparate mysteries that barely dovetailed and like divided the cast. Even in the first episode, yes, it's mostly the like computer worm is the main thing, but the hijacking is kind of on the side and it sort of ties in, but not really. This episode, they're like laser focused. They're working on a single mystery. All the characters are involved in it. I think it's working much better. And honestly, I was probably going to give it a lower rating initially, but having talked about it with you guys, I think it's going to bump me up a half a point. I'm going to give it a full 8.
I'm pretty close on this, and similar for all the reasons you guys mentioned. I think the show in episode 4 is the first time I felt like I understood why this show has a cult following, which has developed over time. And if you look up anything online on this show, people have really good feelings and good things to say about it. And after I watched the first few episodes, I was like, am I watching a different show? Like, what is it that people like about it so much? And then I watched episode 4 and I said, I can kind of see it. And if the show keeps going in this trajectory, I can see why it should have maybe had a little bit longer life than it did. But this episode, again, was not perfect, but it was the best they've done so far. So I'm giving it a 7.5 with a little room to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it'll ever really reach the promise that's there, but I can totally see. I'm like, I can see why this is it's getting me hooked, even though it's not perfect. I'm like, there's still a lot to like and like to percolate on. And even if they don't nail it every time, I like to imagine the best version of it in my head as I watch it anyway. So like, it's drawing me in for sure.
Only as we're talking about this, am I starting to think, like, what other British space shows? Like, wasn't there, like, you've got obviously Doctor Who, and then and then there's Red Dwarf, right? Because just looking at it in the visual of, like, because you remember the guy's head, was almost like the Red Skull or something, and
right.
And I just remember being like, what is that? And really giving it a few honest shots and just being like, I'm not into this show. However, this show, I feel like if I had seen this at that time, I might have watched this show.
I was trying to think of corollaries for this like kind of show even today, and it's so weird. This is just like its own unique thing that I can't think of anything that really is like it.
And it's funny because in the first few episodes, it almost felt like because of its uniqueness, maybe that's the reason it didn't work. It's like, these two ideas, this like noir in space just doesn't really work. But then you watch this episode and you think, oh no, it could work. And maybe there was other reasons why it didn't have a long life.
But I think that about wraps it up, you guys. I think we've really broken down these 2 episodes. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us this week. It was great to watch these with you. You brought so much thought and insight into it. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks.
And cigarettes.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And listener, on our Instagram and Twitter, of course, you will see some clips from this show. There's going to be
Space Rover driving a little miniature.
Yeah, absolutely. Space Rover driving around. Divas has 5 wives. That spaceship, the
Gravity,
the Ronald Reagan. You're going to see the Ronald Reagan, the Gravity.
Yeah.
All kinds of great stuff. And maybe you watched this show when it was on the air and you have fond memories. You can email us at continuumdrag@gmail.com if you want to send us any trivia you might know. But that wraps it up. So, listener, thank you for joining us. And Jordan, I'll see you next week.
See you then. Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Rex Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Hughes.